wine has a special story and special history in Bela Krajina. It is one of the most important cultures that are grown here. Answer when it began is a bit complex. It would go something like, we know that the tribes here used wine in the prehistorical times. If they grew it here, we're not certain. It probably came with the Roman times, but we are certain that it was here in the 14th century. The charter from 1390 speaks about Tuschentalerperg, which is the vineyard above Tusev. What the charter says is that we have organized wine growing at the end of 14th century. That means that the wine was here prior to that, and it was probably grown throughout the 14th century and perhaps even prior to that. They planted the wine in the areas that were not suitable for anything else. And that means it was on the southern slopes of hills. And you can see throughout the whole Bela Krajina, especially Gorjanci and Kočevska Gora, and then down to even lower. You can see it on older pictures from 17th century from Valvazor, and then you can see it even in cataster form from the 19th century or 18th century. So that means the slope of the hill was cut completely, it was cleaned, and the wine was planted there. And the thing is, that area that was cleaned got its name. Let's say if it was above Tusev, it was Tuschentalerperg, vineyards of Tusev. The head of the whole area was the Bergmaister, and he was elected for a year or more, and he was the one responsible for gathering the wine, organizing the labor and so on. The people that grew wine, the Bergleute or Bergmann, got together at least once a year, and they set the basic things, like when the work will be organized, who will start with, I don't know, specific things like managing the fences, organizing the transport of the wine and so on. And even and if they had any disputes among them, they also settled them. It's called vecha. It's like a gathering of all the wine growers under the supervision of the main, the Bergmeister, and they set the table for the work in the next year. And naturally, through the time, there was a lot of special law connected with wine growing, so they had to write it down, and that's the so-called Gorske Bukve. And Gorske Bukve are the oldest legal text in Slovenian language, because not all the wine growers could speak German, and because of that they had to translate the law into Slovenian language. So that's actually the oldest law. So that's about the organization. So the thing in a vineyard back then, it was that you could have different people of different social status that worked together and were equal in that vineyard, in that wine area. There were no special privileges for someone that was of higher social status towards someone of lower. So that's one interesting aspect. The name of the wine that was grown in Bela Krajina is Marchwein. Marchwein also, there are also a few variations of this name, like Marchwein and so on, but in basic it means the wine from Mark. In this case, Mark is an area, is the geographical political area of today's Dolenjska and Bela Krajina. And the wine that was grown in Dolenjska and Bela Krajina was called Marchwein. This name disappeared, and it was almost forgotten. In the 20th century, nobody used that name for wine from Bela Krajina anymore. One of the reasons is the change of the language, naturally, but the other one is that the old wineries were destroyed because of phylloxera and other reasons. So that's the name. The other thing is the value. The value of the Marchwein was, we really don't know what was the value, for instance, in 14th or 15th century. We know it was transported to today's central Slovenia and probably to Croatia, but we don't know to what extent because there are no sources that will speak about it. We have the first prices from 16th century, and in 16th century Marchwein was drank also in Ljubljana, and there we have an order saying that the price of Marchwein is 2 kreuzer and the value of Teran and the wine from Vipava is 7 kreuzer for the same quantity. So you can see that it was at least 3.5 times lower value of than it was of Vipavec, which was the best wine from area of Krajinska. But then in the beginning of 17th century there was the so-called Uskoška vojna between Austria and Venice, and because of that all the vineyards in Karst and Vipava were destroyed. That meant that there was no wine from Vipava to be sold anymore, and the price of Marchwein went up. And Valvazor spoke that Marchwein, that means 100 years later, Marchwein is considered the best wine in Slovenia, or Krajinska in that time. And Valvazor said that there is no better spice wine, that means wine that you eat with your lunch, than Marchwein. So you can see the interesting change. So that's one aspect. We don't know how it was valued later on. There should be some serious studies about that, so it's hard to say. We know there were wine cellars connected with each of the major castles in Bela Krajina, and not only with the castles, also with the mansions. So there was no, let's say, noble seat without a big cellar. And for instance, the castle of Pobrežje had 2 wine cellars. In they called it the big cellar and the old house cellar. And together in the castle there was 20,106 liters of wine. That was only one castle, and that's in 1655. So you can imagine one castle with 20,000 liters. And another castle in Vinica had 11,000. So only one lord in Bela Krajina possessed around 31,000 liters of wine.